welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda. Today, or the day that this will go up, is September 4th. And I had 4 books out from NetGalley that published on September 5th. So I thought instead of doing individual videos for each one, I'd kind of just record my thoughts as I finish them and then put them together in one video. So I only was able to finish 3 of them in time. I'm going to skip ahead in my own reading and start doing the October books. And once I catch up with those, I'll come back and catch up on September, because I don't want a domino effect of getting behind in my NetGalley reading. But I did want to go over the 3 books that I read from NetGalley that publish on September 5th, which is tomorrow. So I've already done videos for 2 of them, and I'm going to go do a video for the 3rd one. And I think I am going to organize them by lowest rated to highest rated. So we'll save the best for last. So stay tuned. Okay, today I am talking about Imperfect Lives by C.J. Washington. This is my second take at this because I did the first take with the wrong title. Oh boy. So Imperfect Lives by C.J. Washington. This is his second book. However, I'm trying to get to my review here. However, it is the first one of his books I've read. And I'm going to give you the setup of it, and then I'm just going to kind of leave it there. So the setup is we are introduced to 3 characters. The first one is a man who is in prison, but he is also dying of pancreatic cancer. And he's in prison because he is a hitman who's confessed to several crimes, several murders. And then we meet, and his name is Cooper. And then we meet a woman named Tamara, who is a widow with a young, like 7-8-year-old son, just trying to make her way in her life. Her husband committed suicide a few years previous to this book. And then we meet Cindy, and Cindy has the perfect life, but she also clearly, as we find out very early on, has some secrets. And their lives become intertwined. And that's all I really need to say to set this book up, because anything more is going to spoil it. So when I wrote up my review about this, I said it reminded me of a scene in one of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. I can't remember which one, because it's been a long time since I've seen it, but he goes and he gets a lump of coal and then he squeezes it because he's Superman, and he opens it up and it's a diamond. So that's what this book is like, except it's only the coal. And I'm not saying this book's like a lump of coal. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is this book is very unfinished. There were things I liked about this book. I thought the characters were fascinating. I thought they had fascinating stories. I was really interested in that. I thought generally, if you look at a very high level and you look at this plot, it's a very interesting plot. I also thought that Washington does a really good job of pacing and giving you the information at just the right time, and it's going to keep you turning the pages. So there are really good elements in this book, and this is a good start of a book. It just is not a book yet. It's just not the good book yet. I think that my biggest issue with this book is that there's just so much telling and not much, if any, showing. Yeah. It very much felt like a rough draft. Let's put it that way. It did. It felt like he's trying to get the story on paper so that he can go back and rewrite it and get it all shipshape. But we're getting that first draft is what this book felt like. And I also felt like it needed a lot more editing. There were things in this book that did not belong. There's a whole plot with like somebody's brother that has nothing to do with anything, which I'm like, why am I reading this? This has nothing to do with anything. There's also, and this was where I was like really, and this happened earlier in the book where I was really where my alert signals kind of went up. Washington gives a very detailed description of the housing crash of the 2002-2008. Very detailed. Now, that is not interesting history. I mean, there are things in history that happen in history that are interesting to read about, and then there's like financial crashes, which aren't really that interesting to read about. But also, I was getting really irritated because I knew all this. I lived through this. We were actually buying a house during that time. So this was like, why am I reading this? And then I thought to myself, obviously, they're going into such detail here that it's got to be for people who don't know. So if someone's 10 years younger than me, they may not know. It may not be for me, but might be for someone else. It's very important to the story, right? Wrong. Had nothing to do whatsoever with the story. All it did was explain why someone was a stay-at-home dad. I was like, you could have done that in a sentence. One sentence is all that took. And that's something an editor should have pulled out. I was like, what is going on here? So I found this very frustrating because I felt like I was reading someone's rough draft, and it was published. CJ Washington had a great story here. I wish that he had stayed with it a bit longer to polish it and to get it something that could be really good, because as it is now, it's the lump of coal before Superman squeezes it. That's all I can say about it. I ended up giving this book a C. I did have to give it props because interesting characters, interesting plot, just sloppy. I don't even want to say bad execution or sloppy execution. It's just like I felt like I got your notes for the story. So can't recommend this one. Sorry. Anyway. Okay, so this book that I'm going to talk about is Reykjavík by Ragnar Jónasson and Katrín Jakobsdóttir, translated from the Icelandic by Victoria Cribb. And I apologize if I slaughtered those names. My Icelandic is not up to par. So this was a really interesting book. This is a Nordic noir. And it's kind of it's a historical Nordic noir. It's set in two time periods. There was a crime that was committed in 1956, and then the bulk of the story, because the investigation, or at least the investigation that actually yields the fruit, happens 30 years later in 1986. So in 1956, there is a 15-year-old girl, and she has gone to spend the summer working for kind of an up-and-coming couple who have a summer place on an island outside of Reykjavík. And one day she just never comes home, and she just disappears, and no one knows what's going on. And there is a police officer who's trying to investigate it. He is never able to figure out what happens. Go ahead 30 years to 1986, and you have an up-and-coming journalist who's now on the trail. He is going to crack this case open, and he gets into it pretty deep. And that's all I want to say about it, because anything else is a spoiler. So I quite like this book. Let me start by saying that. I've read some Nordic noir, but I haven't read a lot of Nordic noir. I have enjoyed what I have read, and I enjoyed this one too. It is very much Nordic noir, which I enjoyed, but was also kind of one of my issues. And my issue is probably an unfair assumption on my part, but here it is. This book is dedicated to Agatha Christie, and they make references to Agatha Christie in the book. And because of that, I would say this should be like an homage to Agatha Christie, and it should feel Agatha Christie-ish, and it doesn't. It feels very Nordic noir. So that might just be an assumption that I myself kind of thought up, and it didn't live up to it, which isn't fair, but I will put that out there because I really only had 2 issues with this book. But there are a lot of things I liked. It is well written. The mystery is interesting because it's, on one level, it was kind of obvious on a grand scheme of things level, but then the details of it were a surprise to me. And I liked that. I was like, I liked feeling smart because I figured it out, but also being surprised by the end. So that was good. The different characters in this book are really interesting. This is definitely a plot-driven book, but the characters are given enough. It does not focus on character development, but there's enough in the characters to make them interesting, which I really appreciated it. Great sense of place. Iceland is someplace I've always wanted to go. It just seems, I mean, of course I've seen videos of it and pictures, but I want to go experience it. And I think that the authors did a really good job of bringing Reykjavík and then the areas outside of Reykjavík to life. Just makes me want to go there more. And they also did a really good job of setting it in time. So the 1956 part is really just a small part, but so most of it takes place in 1986. And they did something, they put it against 2 really big events. Well, if you're Icelandic, 2 really big events. I think for the rest of the world, only 1 really big event. So the first one is that Iceland gets its own TV channel. I think that's probably a big deal if you're from Iceland, but the rest of the world, probably not a huge deal. But the other The other major event that he puts it against is the summit between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. And it's not at all in the plot. This is not a spoiler because it's not at all part of the plot, but it does really set a good background. And it does provide the scene for some action. And it was really interesting because I remember that. I was a child. I was a young teenager at the time. And I remember that. So it's nice to kind of go back and have that little bit of it. So yeah, that was great. This is not, however, my other issue. So the first issue was the Agatha Christie thing. The second is this is 2 authors. I'm always a little apprehensive going into a book with 2 authors because if it's one story, it needs to feel like one story, no matter how many authors there are. I don't want it to feel like, oh, this person wrote this and this person wrote that. Once in a while that works. I have read books, I can't remember the name of the book. It was an epistolary novel and between 2 people and one person wrote one and one person wrote the other. That worked. Generally, though, you want it to feel like only one author writes it, even though if there's more than 2 authors. So this one, I don't know. I don't know how the 2 authors separated their work in this. I don't know what their method for writing of it was or anything. I do know because I skimmed the afterward. It was written during lockdown, so they weren't physically together when they were writing this. So I don't know what the method was, but it does feel like one author wrote one part of the book and then something happens in the middle, which I'm not going to tell you because major spoiler. And from that point on, the other author writes it. And so that was a little jarring. That was jarring. I don't know if that's how they wrote it. That's just how it feels that they wrote it. And I wish they had smoothed that out. I think if they had smoothed that out, this would have been a much better book. I ended up giving it a B+. And even though the Agatha Christie thing kind of irked me, I realized it's kind of a me thing. So I didn't take that into account when trying to figure out what grade I'd give this. But I did think that was the sort of break in the narration style a little bit was enough for me to really kind of say, okay, this is something that needs to be noted. Which is too bad because the book is great. Otherwise, I would highly recommend it. I still recommend this book. I think this might actually be a really good book if you have never tried Nordic Noir and you want to try it because it has those historical sort of anchors. Yeah, I know the Icelandic TV station probably isn't that much of an anchor, but the Gorbachev-Reagan summit is. So it gives you a kind of real anchor. They also talk about other things in the 80s, like they go to see Top Gun and things like that. And they talk about songs that are on the radio. So the 80s really are in there. And it really helps to have that. And I think this makes it an easier entry point into the subgenre. So I would definitely recommend it there. And I'd recommend it even if you do like it. I just wish the transition was different in the middle. That is really my big thing with it. But overall, I gave it a B+. This review in my sort of parade of books being published September 5th is for The Raging Storm by Anne Cleeves. This is the 3rd entry in her Two Rivers or Matthew Venn series. I've heard it referred to as both series. On Goodreads, they call it the Two Rivers, so I think that's the official series name. So I this is a mystery, and I'd kind of like to separate the mystery from the story for just a little bit. So the mystery, this is written by Anne Cleeves, who is a very solid mystery writer. And this is a very solid mystery. It works very well. She plays fair. And I suspected some elements of the solution, but I was never completely sure. If you're a mystery reader, you will have no complaints about this mystery. And I don't want to say much more about it than that because I want to talk more in this one about the other elements of this book. So the central character of this series is Matthew Venn, who is a detective in a community or in South Devon or in Devon somewhere. And his backstory is that he was raised in a sort of insular conservative religious sect. He did leave it when he was 18 years old. So he has a lot of sort of problematic feelings about this sect because he feels like he was shunned for leaving. He also is married to a man, which, not surprisingly, the sect does not look kindly upon that. And his real issue at this point is with his mother because he'd like to have a relationship with his mother, but she's still part of this organization. And so it goes like that. So we still have a lot of that going on. This mystery actually takes place in a town near where Two Rivers, where there is a large influence of this religious sect, and many of the characters that we meet in this mystery are members of that group. But we also get to really dive in more to Matthew Venn's character. We learn that he's suffering from some, I'll say, social anxieties about dealing with people. He's not someone with super strong person skills. He's very introverted. He's uncomfortable around other groups of people. And these are things that were touched on in earlier books, but Cleeves really dives into these elements of Venn's personality in this book. And I really appreciated that, because now I really feel like I know Matthew Venn. I don't want to say he's flawed. He's a very multi-dimensional character. He's as flawed as any other human being. I will say that. It's not like he has some really kind of deep, dark secret. But he definitely has elements to his personality that bring out more facets as you read. We also get to know a little bit more about his team. The two other notable people on his team there's Jen, I think it's Jen Rafferty, I think that's her last name, and she is a subordinate, but a detective. She, and we know this from previous books, she's a single mom. She's from Liverpool, but she left Liverpool to get away from an abusive relationship. And in this book, her children are like, teenagers. They're teenagers, so they're self-sufficient enough. There's discussions in this book about, because the murder scene is not in their town, whether or not she should stay in the town where the murder happens. And they take into account the fact that she has kids and she has to get them to school, but they're old enough that she can leave them on the weekends. That sort of situation is going on. But we're starting to see her kind of look beyond her children at this point. Now she's like, what does she want from her life? Kind of beyond her children. And I really appreciated seeing that. We also, the other sort of subordinate detective is a man named Ross May, who in earlier books, I gotta admit, came off as really smarmy. I did not like him. I still would prefer Jen, but we get more from Ross in this. There's a real competitiveness between Ross and Jen. And that is sort of played out in this book in sort of a way that's easy to take. And we see it through Matthew's eyes, like, oh, the kids are fighting again, kind of thing. And I kind of really like that element. But we also get to see some more human sides of Ross, which I also liked, because having this just sort of smarmy character off to the side was a little bit of a downer on the previous two books. So I like that we're getting more from him. Another element that I really loved about this book was the sense of place. So as I said, the murder and all the action in this book does not take place in Two Rivers. It takes place in a neighboring town. And this town it's a coastal town, but it's not a resort town. There's not much going on in this town. It's quiet, it's dreary. And I think for a writer, it's one thing to be able to bring to life some colorful place with a lot of interesting elements. That's great when they do it, but I think it's much more difficult to bring to life these places that are lacking the interesting elements and are, sort of monotone, and there's nothing really notable about them. But Cleeves is still able to bring this town to life, and I was really impressed by that. The town is painted in terms of a lot of grays and things like that. And she really builds on that. And so I really felt like I could see this town in my mind's eye. So this book was a really strong success for me, actually. If I had to rank it 1, 2, 3 with the other ones, I would put it 1 or 2. I definitely preferred it to the second book. It's hard to compare something to the first book in a series because the first book is so built up with establishing the characters. But I think that we move so far with establishing characters in this book that it really stands out. Again, the mystery is, I should probably give you kind of the premise of the mystery at least. Although, again, if you are a mystery reader, you will appreciate this mystery. It's a strong mystery. It is, you are in safe hands with Anne Cleeves. But the premise of this is, in this town, sort of a local boy made good comes back. He's kind of become sort of a celebrity with like travel shows, and he shows back up in town, and he's kind of kind of plays up the mysteriousness about himself, sort of in the pub with everybody. So people are like, oh, look, Jem's back in town, but he's not really saying anything. And he talks about like meeting up with someone, and he plays up mystery around him. But then one night, or I guess it's probably early morning. It's not really important whether it's night or early morning. The lifeboat crew, which is a volunteer crew, gets called out because there is a boat sort of out, kind of in a little bay or harbor, out, and the tide's coming in, and there's a storm coming in, the raging storm. I should say, back in Sense of Place, the atmosphere is really big too, because there's all these storms coming in, which just really added to the mystery. But anyway, the lifeboat crew goes out. They find this boat, and in this boat is the body of this man. He is deceased, and he's naked. And how did he get out there? And he clearly did not go out by himself. What happened? And that's what brings in Matthew and his team. So yes, so I think that if you're looking for a mystery, this is a good, strong mystery. You will enjoy it. It hits all the right marks. Anne Cleeves is you can trust her being good at a mystery. But there's so much more to this book. You have this wonderful character development, this wonderful sense of place. This book really, I went into this book expecting to like it. So when I go to NetGalley, I do have a bad habit of just kind of clicking on titles that kind of look interesting, which I kind of need to curb that, which is why I have so many NetGalley books to go. But this one was one like, I am going to read this book anyway, so I want to read it through NetGalley because this was going to be read by me anyway. And I was excited to read it, but it surpassed my expectations. I ended up giving this book an A. I do recommend it. However, as it is the third in a series, I do feel that you need to read at least the first book first. I don't necessarily feel that you need to read the books in order, but I do think that you need to read the first book to get the basics of where the characters are before you read on. Now, there's only 2 other books plus a novella. At this point, it doesn't matter if you read those in order, but just start with the first. And then, and I can't remember the title. I will put the title of the first book here, but start with the first book if you haven't read any. If you feel like you want to read the second, that's great. If you want to feel like the second book is good, I just think of the 3, I would rank it number 3. If you want to skip ahead to the third one, you're going to be fine. Yeah, so I recommend this book. This was a really successful read for me. More than, I mean, I expected it to be good, but it exceeded my expectations. So if you are looking for a mystery series, definitely check out the 2 Rivers Mystery Series by Anne Cleeves. And if you have already started that series, you're going to want to continue it with this one.